name is Camryn Counsil. I am a sophomore research fellow through the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College, and today I am here on Cemetery Ridge with the famous copse of trees behind me. Now you may be wondering how this clump of trees got its famous nickname, and better yet, how Gettysburg National Military Park as a whole gained recognition as a prosperous destination. Well, for better or for worse, many of those effects can be attributed to the work of John Bachelder. After the Battle of Gettysburg raged through this small Pennsylvania town, tourists began flocking to this location in the following years in order to stand where notable generals had stood, but also to stand where men had died. Even now, the Battle of Gettysburg still draws in visitors, and this battlefield gets over 1 million visitors every year. But who helped to plant those initial seeds? John Badger Bachelder was born in 1825 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. Throughout his life, he was educated at military institutes and even became the principal of the Pennsylvania Military Institute in 1851. With his background in military training, when the American Civil War started in 1861, John Bachelder became interested in documentation, and he believed there was no better way to get reliable source material than to follow along with the Union Army of the Potomac. However, his most influential work came with the Battle of Gettysburg. It was here that Bachelder collected notes and materials by conducting interviews with soldiers and other civilians, and also studying the terrain of this land. With this information, he was able to create topographical maps of the battlefield and also the town. These maps weren't just an academic interest. Bachelder created these maps and these other materials in order to be sold to audiences who might have been curious what battle might have been like. And through these maps, they could experience what a soldier might have experienced here at the Battle of Gettysburg. He pushed the envelope farther with his canvas work in 1870, titled The Repulse of Longstreet's Assault at the Battle of Gettysburg. This was a large spectacle piece, and Bachelder was one of the few to call Pickett's charge by this name. This uniqueness and scale generated interest in Gettysburg as a whole. In addition to being an artist, John Bachelder considered himself a historian, publishing books about the history of Gettysburg. It was within these historical accounts that Bachelder coined the phrase, the copse of trees. This term came after Bachelder interviewed a Confederate veteran of Pickett's charge in 1869. This man's name, Walter Harrison, told Bachelder that this specific clump of trees was the direction that the Confederate line was aiming for during July 3rd of 1863. To Harrison's remark, Bachelder commented, "Why, Colonel, as the Battle of Gettysburg was the crowning event of this campaign, this copse of trees must have been the high watermark of the rebellion." Many have seen the Battle of Gettysburg as a turning point within the Civil War, and thus the title, High Watermark of the Rebellion, seems to indicate that this was the furthest that the Confederate efforts ever got to victory. This monument behind me was dedicated in 1892 after Bachelder had been elected to the board of directors for the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association, or the GBMA for short, in 1880. Like his canvas work previously, this monument is again one of the few places on the battlefield landscape that uses the term Longstreet's Assault to describe what many others have described as Pickett's charge. An ordinary clump of trees had become something much more sacred. Now, the term copse, which means exactly a small clump of trees, wasn't a highly used term in the 1860s or 70s, but yet Bachelder wanted to create something unique, something that was marketable towards his narrative of what happened here. So many people were even interested in the copse of trees that people began taking branches off of the trees and selling them. because people wanted tangible evidence that they were here at the famous trees. Now, these aren't witness trees behind me, but they are ancestor trees of the original copse of trees that were here. So in a way, where we're standing would have been the trees that the Confederate troops would have seen all the way across on Seminary Ridge. Obviously now, in the winter months, the copse of trees wouldn't have looked as they would during July, where they would have been full of leaves and have been a more distinguishable landmark on the plain of Cemetery Ridge. With some of these phrases, Bachelder had just created landmark, dramatic spaces within the battlefield that people would come and pay to see. After all, for Union and Confederate veterans, or even civilians, who wouldn't want to come here and see the high watermark of the rebellion? This is a distinguishing moment in history, according to many, and so this monument behind me is a physical reminder of that narrative, and Bachelder knew he could use this to his advantage. To further increase tourism, Bachelder published a guidebook to take guests through the battlefield. It was published in 1873 and it was called Gettysburg, What to See and How to See It. This book goes into detail about the important locations within the battlefield and also the town. However, this guide also leaves out details of the battle so as to not, quote, mar the interest in a pleasant drive. People didn't want to come and see the bloody images of the battle. They wanted to come see the landscape. And with this guidebook, Bachelder is directing people to what they want to see. And by doing that, he's able to increase tourism and increase the commercialization of the Battle of Gettysburg. Throughout John Bachelder's efforts here at Gettysburg, it can be said that his work shifted from documentation to memorialization and even finally into commercialization. His work began with accompanying the army in order to get soldier testimonials and also to survey the landscape in which the battle was happening. That was his documentation. However, his approach starts to shift once he creates maps and other historical documents of the battle in order to make everything seem like a spectacle, such as the copse of trees or the high watermark of the rebellion. His guidebooks continue to sanitize the history of what happened here in order to make it a more palatable experience for the visitors coming to Gettysburg. Within it all, John Bachelder continued to push the narratives and the themes that he wanted to see within the Battle of Gettysburg. In the Civil War, a lot of efforts to memorialize these battlegrounds have been through organizations or individuals. They have to get people, even those further removed, to want to come to these places and continue to further their legacies. In order to do this, Civil War battlefields have been preserved and even marketed upon so as to increase their spheres of influence throughout the country and even throughout the world. John Badger Bachelder was no different. He understood that commercialization and history went hand in hand. He took the concrete knowledge of what happened here and he was able to spin it into greater narratives about the meanings and the impacts of the Civil War. His techniques of marketing helped to increase a growing audience of visitors. Even today, that audience still exists.